Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Drabinski. I work here at Ideas on Fire, and I'm happy to see you all today. It's cold where I am, but hopefully it's warming up where you are. Today's webinar, Using Side Gigs to Explore Career Options, is going to take us through some different issues. First, when to engage in side giggery, sort of how to think through some of the complications of that, especially when so many of us are critical of exactly the kind of side gigs that we're looking to do, and then also brainstorm a bunch of ideas for possible side gigs. And some of these will be about just bringing in some extra money to make ends meet, and some of these options give us opportunities for to actually think about different careers. So the way this will work is I'm about to go away from this live broadcast, from you seeing me and my beautiful bald head, to the PowerPoint presentation. And you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a bar where you can type in questions and comments. And I can't see that when I'm doing the webinar, but if you'll type there while I'm talking, I can see those things when I return at the end. So the whole thing will take about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll come back and we can have a discussion. All right, so we're so glad you're joining us today. So goodbye. All right, so today's, as I said today, we're talking about using side gigs to explore career options. On tap today, we're going to talk about why we should consider side gigs, especially for those of us who are graduate students or who work in the academy. Shouldn't you just be writing? Isn't this taking away from the energy for what you should be doing? Next, we'll talk about why considering side gigs is important, even though for a lot of us, we understand them as just exploitation machines. And then we'll walk through a number of different kinds of sort of categories of side gigs. Kinds of side gigs you can find on campus. These are often the easiest to do and work most closely with the skills that we have as graduate students or academics. Side gigs just for money. These are things that you can sort of fit into the flexibility of the academic schedule and just make some cash. Side gigs using related skills. We'll talk about freelance writing, how to make pitches, how to find side gigs related to things like editing, but then also some side gigs that can help us explore career options outside of the academy. And then we'll talk about how to find side gigs, where to find them, which is always tricky. And then finally, we'll end by talking about whether your side gig is still your side gig, or if perhaps it could be another career. And should you finish that dissertation or article anyway? Is this a way perhaps out of the adjunct teaching cycle that so many of us have been stuck in for a long time? So I hope that this will prove informative. All right, so when we are considering side gigs, I think that for a lot of us, the shouldn't I be writing thing is sort of weighing over us. And that might come from ourselves, but it can often also come from peers. And if we're in graduate school, from advisors who want to see writing productivity. And so how to choose whether or not to engage in this kind of side work really depends on what your goals are. So it's important to consider your short-term goals, right? Your goals for the coming months. And those might be to finish a chapter, right? Or to get an article out, to apply for X number of jobs and postdocs, something like that. But then also consider your long-term goals. Do you want to be an academic? Do you want to be a tenured line professor somewhere? And we'll talk later about we don't even need to talk about it, right? We all know the chances of landing that gig are slim, but if that's what we're shooting for, that changes our sort of calculus about whether or not to engage in side work. Is your long-term goal something sort of broader, to think about ways out of the academy? So when you think about both short-term and long-term goals, it can help you decide if looking for those side hustles is a good use of your time. But it's not just about your goals, right? It's also about your needs. So there are two sort of major needs that we'll talk about today. One is money, and the other is time. And you all know as well as I do how important these questions are. In terms of money, if we are adjuncting or if we're graduate students living on a stipend, we often find that the only way to make those ends meet is a loan, right? But side gigs can fill in the gaps there. If we have people we're supporting, if we have children, the side gig can be the money that comes in that helps you buy out some of your time, right? So that you can get childcare, so you can spend more time on your writing, things like that. So money is an important thing to consider. And I think sometimes in the academy, we're urged not to talk about this or not to think about this. I know when I started graduate school, I was encouraged to take out as many loans as I could to avoid looking like I was doing anything but focusing on my academic career. And I didn't take that advice, but if I had, I would have ended up in a lot more debt than I'm currently in, right? So side gigs can be a way to keep ourselves out of the debt that limits our options later. So that's not a small concern, and it's one that I wish that academics would talk more about. For adjuncts, the side gig can be the money that allows you to travel to the conference that's so important for networking or for interviews, right? Or just for your own professional development. But the other need that we have as academics or graduate students is, well, graduate students are academics as well, but people who are in graduate school or working as professors or adjuncts is time. And I think when you're deciding whether or not to find a side gig, it's really important to be honest with yourself about how much time you need to get the work done for your academic gig. And that sounds like, oh, make sure you save enough time. But I think also it's important to remember that as academics, our time is often even more flexible than it ever will be in any other kind of career. And so learning how to write in chunks of time can free up a lot of time that where a side gig might actually give you a welcome distraction. And I know that sounds wild, especially if you think, I already have so many things to do, I couldn't possibly do more. But sometimes having so much to do and having huge gaps of time to do it in, right, can actually keep us from being as productive as we could be. So sometimes being a little busier, having something else can make the time that we have to work on our writing, for example, more productive. I'm just thinking back to the days of dissertating when I would have 10 hours and I would sit at that desk and end up with a page of writing. Learning how to write differently was enabled by getting other kinds of jobs at that time. And then finally, things to assess when thinking about doing side gigs is your future possibilities. And by this, I mean the job market. Are you spending your time doing the work that will prepare you for a tenure line position in the academy, or will get you tenure, or something that's a sort of traditional academic labor? If that's so, right, you might consider focusing on side gigs that will help move you towards that goal. You might also think about your long-term and present need goals a little bit differently. But it's also important to think about the job market as also a set of possibilities. What are the chances of getting a job out there? And we all know that they're slim. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but it is worth developing other skills while in graduate school or while in those contingent positions that a lot of us find ourselves in, to think about different possibilities for a career. It's hard to say that, but it's true. What are we going to do if we don't get that tenure line job? I didn't, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. And then also think about your personal life. A lot of academic life insists that you can just pick up and move whenever you want. For those who are established somewhere, who might be older, who might have spouses who are locked into jobs somewhere, who have kids who they don't want to uproot, right? Being able to move around as an academic, as an itinerant academic, is a lot bigger task, and it might not be something that you choose. And we don't talk about this a lot as being a valid reason to choose a different line of work, but I think we should, right? Because for a lot of us, we can't just get up and move. I know that I can't anymore. I did for years, and I could only do it because I was young and I was single. For once that your personal life is way, those decisions can be a lot harder, right? So of course, long distance relationships can work, and a lot of people choose that and they love it, or they make it work. But for some of us, choosing personal life means that we're going to limit our job market possibilities, and those side gigs can become even more important. Another issue that comes up when we talk about side gigs is that for a lot of us, we understand them as exploitation machines, right? Because side gigs are increasingly marketed as this great way to earn a little extra money. And the reason people need a little of extra money is because wages are so low, right? So the idea that, say, I'm adjuncting at multiple institutions, making $2,500 to $4,000 a class, if I'm lucky, I'm spending all these days driving back and forth. You want me to add like driving somebody for Lyft or Uber is another thing I do, right? It feels really terrible. It's a way of sort of, these side gigs have a way of exploiting us with both the fact of low wages, and then they also pay us not well, right? They lack benefits, and that's largely how the people who run the side gig hustle business, how they make their money, right? So the costs of work are shifted onto the worker. So if you engage in side gigs like Uber, for example, or Lyft, your car, you all know this, but your car depreciates, but nobody pays for that. You pay for the insurance, no one else does. So side gigs are often really exploitative. Freelance writing, for example, you can produce a lot of content and not make a lot of money. If you're an artist, you can be encouraged to work for free just to get it out there. And so ways of exploiting, a difficult economy and exploit, and that can make us very resistant to doing side gigs. At the same time, and this is that part where there's no clean living in capitalism, there are ways that the side gig economies can be really helpful, right? They're flexible. A lot of them are really flexible. If you're doing freelance writing, you do that on your own time. If you're, say, if you're doing sort of jewelry making, you can do that again in your own time. It's flexible, right? It gives you some freedom, right, to make choices about how you spend your time and where your money comes from. And I just say, oh, really, about this? Because, this is that sticky wicket of capitalism, right? We're free to make money on the open market through our labor, and we're also free of any other choice. So not a great freedom, but there it is. And then there's also the realities of our daily lives, where we often don't make enough money to make ends meet, and we're facing a job market that doesn't have prospects for all of us. So as exploitative as side gigs can be, they're also often a way out of the complications of our present conditions. So it is what it is, and the rest of the webinar, we're just going to assume that we have somehow worked through our critique of these and or have decided that we're going to look for some side gig work. So, it depends. Are they exploitation machines? Yeah, they are, but there are ways that you can make side gigs work for you as much as you can. So let's talk about different kinds of side gig work that you can find. I wanted to start by talking about side gigs you can find on campus, because these are often ways to explore other careers in academia that can be open to us as academics, whether or not we finish our PhDs, but they can be another place to still work in college settings, and to use our skills, but to have more job security often than we can get from a degrading tenure system, especially if we luck into a job at a place with a union. So when you're looking for side gigs, a lot of times we focus on the ones we can get right away, the teaching assistant or graduate assistant, but there are often other kinds of work you can weasel in. Now, it depends where you work if you're allowed to make extra money. Where I work, I have a contingent faculty position. I can make 1/3 of my salary above as extra work at the university. So there's a cap on it. For graduate students, there's often a cap that says you can't work at all, in which case you might look for this kind of work at area universities that are near you. But there are a lot of things that are involved in running a college. So I've given a couple of ideas here. Student life will often have side gigs for faculty or graduate students who want to work with student groups on campus or something. It's worth reaching out to your student life folks to find out about that. Advising is another really active department on a lot of campuses, and a lot of places will bring on part-time advisors during advising season or in the summer, and this can be really good side work because it gives you a chance to explore some of this sounds, I was going to say, it gives you the opportunity to explore the bureaucratic nature of the university, which doesn't sound good, but those skills can be really marketable later. And it can also be really rewarding to work with students to shape a schedule, get to know them a little bit, find out what they want to do. That can turn out to be work that you enjoy. And most colleges are always on the lookout for more people to join their advising teams. So that can be really a good place to look for work. Interdisciplinary departments can also be really helpful, especially for graduate students who can find, I work in an interdisciplinary department we often are hiring people from other departments to work because we don't have graduate students, or we don't have enough faculty to do work. So interdisciplinary departments at your university might have some side work. Another place to look is residence life. And Res Life is often looking for faculty or academics to live in the dorms. That might not sound attractive, but to live in the dorms, you can do it with your family even. And that can greatly reduce your living costs. And it can also give you a sense of what residence life looks like. And that is often a good place to find work after, if you decide not to pursue a teaching career. And then finally, athletics is a great department to look at for side gigs as well. And these are side gigs that might not make immediate sense, but if you are really into yoga and you decide to do yoga instructor training, you might be able to teach classes on campus. We have a postdoc in our department who teaches several athletic classes on our campus and Zumba classes, and has a great time, works in that different context, and develops his own skills as a dancer. So athletics can be actually a surprising place to pick up some side work. When you're looking at side gigs on campus, also working outside of academic schedules and being open to that and asking about that work is really important. For example, our advising team, where I teach, is most active actually in the summer. So if you're around in the summer, this can be a good summer gig. And when you're on a campus, I think it's also really important to network and to get to know people in all these different parts of the university, and to reach out to them and let them know that you're interested in the work. And this can help you also figure out if, say, you start working in advising, is this a side gig or is this a career change? Do I want to get into the line of work of advising, which is its own career trajectory? And doing networking with the advising department will help you figure that out. And they can give you a sense of what you would need to do to get that as a long-term job, right? And help you understand what other education or skills you would need to make a go of it in that career. So sometimes work in residence life, for example, will require a master's in student services or something like that, or master's in higher education. I know most of us might not want to go back to school again, but this can be, if you decide this is something that you want to make into a career with a lot more job prospects, it might be worth it. So it's something to consider. Now let's look at some side gigs that are just about the money. If you just need money from your side gig, just get money. I think these can sometimes open up into new careers unexpectedly, but they don't have to. It's okay and not crass to just need the cash. So I've listed a whole bunch of ideas here, most of which most of us have done. But I think that as once we sort of get in to graduate school, or we're post PhD, or we're older, we assume that these things are somehow, we shouldn't be doing them because we sort of align them in our heads with work that young people do. But I want to encourage us to break that sort of habit. So here's some ideas: babysitting, pet care, house sitting, rideshare services, delivery, food service, working at the coffee shop, caregiving for elderly people, room sharing. But very carefully, I think if you happen to hail from a city that's had an Airbnb crisis lately, like the Bay Area or New Orleans or New York City, you know that room sharing is sort of maybe not the most ethical practice, but it can be something that you do, but do check with your local regulations. Tutoring, I think, is a great side gig to consider, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide. Organizing, a lot of us have particular skills in that. Moving, helping in the summer with people packing and moving. Things like construction, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide as well. Officiating weddings. I know it sounds wild, but I've officiated a number of weddings and actually gotten paid for it. And speech writing, things that we have skills in as academics, and we can sort of bridge a gap. And the thing I want to say about all these side gigs that are just for money is that they can turn into something else, right? Let's take caregiving, for example. You might do some sort of off the books caregiving for the elderly and find that you really, really enjoy it. And move into that as a job. That's not, that doesn't mean that you've sort of failed at the PhD, right? It might actually help you explore if this kind of care work is something that you want to do. And that's, of course, a growth industry. Food service. If you start working at a coffee shop, you might find that you really enjoy it. You enjoy that pace of life. You might decide that you want to continue working at a coffee shop, or you want to open one, right? You sort of never know how these side gigs might change your career trajectory. And if you're open to the possibility, I think that that you can let it, right? You can sort of let it open doors for you. Tutoring is another one. You might start tutoring for, for the SAT or PSAT, working with a test prep company, and find that you really enjoy that and strike out on your own and get clients of your own, and actually do that full time, right? So any of these side gigs can sort of open up doors that are unexpected. I wanted to talk a little bit though about how to deal with telling people that you engage in this, because I think there is a real stigma against academics and graduate students and people who are over a certain age engaging in this kind of work. Like it's almost sort of out of the class needs of the academy. Letting your, I think there's a fear that if your advisor finds out that you're driving for Lyft at night or something, that they think you're not really serious about your academics. And in terms of that, I would say it really depends on where you are and who you work with and who your colleagues are. And I think that, you've got to sort of go with your gut about this. A couple of years ago, I was having a drink with a tenure-line colleague at my institution, and she asked me, she said, "Do you think your advisor's ever disappointed in you?" And it was such a strange question because no, I don't know. I have a lot of eclectic work experience and I'm having a lovely time. And it hadn't occurred to me, but I think that for her, there was only one sort of route to success that made sense in a life and as an academic. And you're going to run into those people. And so knowing how to sort of navigate that is important. So I guess I would summarize that by saying that you don't have to tell anybody you do this side work, but you also can tell people that you do and explain that as part of you living your best life. I really enjoy having a lot of different kinds of work going at the same time, and it keeps me lively, and I enjoy it. So it's also okay to sort of take a stand and say, yes, this is important to me. And it can also be helpful to remind colleagues that the part where you don't make enough money to make ends meet as somebody, especially if you have dependents, is a structural problem, and you're just doing your best. But I, sort of one caveat to this kind of work, I'm going to bring in some of my father's wisdom. He would say, get over the love of money before you have any. And by that he meant once you start getting money, if you haven't realized that that's not what's most important, you might start just trying to get money and lose track of what actually matters. So one thing that can happen is these side gigs, the sort of ease of having a little more cash can sometimes distract us from our longer term goals, right? So if it doesn't look like it's becoming a career option, I think it's important to sort of notice if it's taking over too much of our time and keeping us from meeting our other goals as academics. I want to now talk about some of the ways we can use our sort of related skills as academics to find side gigs outside of the university. I think this is particularly important for graduate students who often can't work more than they already do at the university, and also for older workers for whom they sort of want other options and other careers that still use the skills, but aren't necessarily, taking your gardening career and becoming a farmer. So some of these side gigs, the first I want to talk about was freelance writing. And I think this is a really natural route for a lot of us to go, especially interdisciplinary scholars who have a broad range of knowledge, and we write all the time and we get good at it. And there are ways that we can use our writing skills and our breadth of knowledge to write really interesting things for a public market. So freelance writing can make a lot of sense. A couple of warnings about freelance writing. One, it's hard to get paid a lot from it. But you can absolutely get paid for your freelance writing. I regularly do, and it's taken some time to work up to that, but it's absolutely worth it. So just a couple of sort of strategies, though, for getting into freelance writing. First, working your networks is incredibly important for finding freelance writing work that pays. So if you live in a city, for example, with an alternative press paper, look at the masthead, see if you know anybody who knows the editors. This is a way that I got into one of my paid writing gigs. And working those networks is really helpful. So that means talking to graduate students, talking to faculty, though again, sometimes faculty will not want you to ever write outside of that dissertation that's due. So, trust yourself about whether or not they're open for that. And then also graduate student networks, I think, can be super important for finding connections places. So for example, if you want to write for The Atlantic, they actually pay sometimes. You can sort of send a cold pitch to the editor, but it will make it through other hoops if you have an introduction, right? So work those networks as much as you can. The second thing is you got to learn how to pitch articles and make a convincing pitch. So that means I like finding publications where you would like to write, looking at the kinds of things that they publish, finding the editor of the section that you think your work would be relevant to, and sort of crafting a pitch. We have a webinar that we did a few months ago about writing for public audiences that is archived and that you can find at the Ideas on Fire website that talks some about how to do this. The next thing I'll say is you'll have to negotiate to get paid. And this can be really scary, but I think it's a really good skill for us to develop no matter what career plan we choose, because we're often not getting paid anything like what we should get paid. So if you're asked to write for someone or you agree to write for a publication, make sure you ask up front if you're going to get paid. I know so many people who have written and they think they're going to get paid, but they're scared to ask and then they don't. So it's really important to ask that and to negotiate how much you're going to get paid. You do have some room to do that, especially if you've developed some public writing clips to sort of back up that case. If you decide to go the freelance writing route, which can be incredibly rewarding, I will say that you've got to beware mission creep, meaning by this I mean freelance writing can take over the rest of your writing career because it sometimes feels, I'm trying to think how best to say this. It is often feels much more immediately rewarding to write something for a public audience and to get paid for it. And often it'll be read by many more people than will ever read anybody's dissertation or academic article. And that kind of rewarding sense can get us addicted to that and away from the kind of long, slow burn of academic writing that's really valuable as well. So just, keep in mind and keep assessing your sort of long-term goals. And if you decide that, if you see that you can start to make a living through freelance writing, then you may actually find that that's your new career. But that's a longer road too. Another side gig that uses our skills is things like freelance editing. Many people at every level, from kids writing essays to get into high school or college, right, need editing, to formal academic editing of book projects, of manuscripts, of dissertations, lots and lots of need for academic editing and for freelance editing. And I think that can make a lot of sense as a side gig that turns into a new career in editing or publishing. I did want to say that it's important to remember that you've got skills you've got to sort of get if you want to do that. So Ideas on Fire, for example, offers a class that you can take to sort of learn some academic editing skills. We were looking to hire some freelance editors and realized that a lot of people don't have a background in it. And investing a little bit of money in a class for something that you're interested in doing can really pay off in terms of the kind of work that you're able to do, both because you've got the skills and training for it, and also because you've got sort of evidence that you have these skills. Freelance editing, the same things that apply to freelance writing work here. You've got to work your networks and find ways in and who needs this work. But then also consider working contractually. This can be a way that you can get experience and work without having to do the work of sort of forming basically your own company. So looking at places that already do editing, like Ideas on Fire, or other, like looking at academic presses and offering your skills, getting paid a contract wage rather than doing this all for yourself is, I think, really helpful. Tutoring is another side gig that uses our skills, and I talked about this on the last slide, but wanted to sort of use this as another opportunity to point out the difference between freelancing and contractual labor. So you can put out a call, like you can post on Craigslist about your skills as a tutor, or post posters around campus, asking if people need your tutoring help. But often it's helpful to work contractually so that you have a middleman who might be taking some of the cash but does a lot of the organizing for you. So places like test prep places are really helpful, reaching out to area high schools and private high schools and seeing if they've got money to pay for this, or if they've got a company that they work with. Finding that kind of work can help ease the way and the labor of doing this work on your own. Because the last thing you want is your side gig to become more work to find the gig than to actually do it. And then I wanted to talk a little bit here also about using unrelated skills that are related to other passions that you have in your life. So just today there was, I read an article about, about graduate students in Canada who were leaving because there were no job prospects, and all sounded very familiar. And they interviewed one woman who talked about taking a flower design class, and she'd always loved flowers, and she took a few classes and she realized she really loved flower design, and she started working at a flower shop part-time, and then she realized that she wanted to be a flower designer, and she's opened her own flower shop. She left her PhD program in women's studies and took this on. And I think that that's a really good and important story of the way that thinking about what else we're good at and what else we love doing can help us create that different kind of career. A lot of people start graduate school right out of college, and we often go because that's the only thing we're good at, right? And so, or we think of doing. I remember asking my advisor, what would you do if you were me? And she said, I'd go to grad school, and that's what I did. So oftentimes we're not even thinking through the other ways we can have a career before we go into graduate school. Others of us go much later in life, and we've already had a career, we've had jobs beforehand, and we've decided this is where we want to go, right? So that this might be a little less relevant in that situation. But there are a lot of examples of passions and skills that we might bring into new kinds of gigs, right? So construction is one example. Maybe we love, we do some small work around the house and we realize we really love it. Taking woodworking classes in your city, if you've got that, maybe learning how to build a few things. It can be a sort of avenue into another career. Jewelry making is another example. I really love riding my bicycle, so I've considered doing a bicycle maintenance course and sort of investing a little bit in developing those skills so that I could work at a bike shop. And so sort of keeping open and being creative about what you like to do and finding work there. And sometimes it'll take a little investment to take the maintenance course or to take the woodworking course, but it can often be worth it and can pay off in terms of the kinds of side gigs you can find that are meaningful instead of the sort of running around town delivering people's food, which can also be meaningful, but that can sort of tap into what you're actually passionate about and can build into different careers. I want to talk here a little bit about finding side gigs. So once you decide you want to do this kind of work, how are you going to find somebody to pay you for it? I think the most important thing is to work your networks and to let people know that you're interested in this kind of work. And both your personal networks and your professional networks. And we've talked a bit about this. Also keeping up via social media or by phone or in some way with colleagues from long ago can often pay off later as your colleagues develop new careers themselves and are looking to hire people. For example, I started working with Ideas on Fire after Kathy was an undergraduate in a class I TA'd for back in the early 2000s, and we've kept in touch, and she was looking for tutors, right? So here I am. So working those networks and also maintaining some contacts, I think, is really important. If you are looking just for money, I listed a number of apps that that you may have used, but that you can also use to make some extra cash. So they're listed here, so I won't read through them. But these are all possibilities. If you don't live in a city, these I think are less useful largely. Handy is one people don't often think of. This is the app through which I've gotten some wedding officiant gigs. And you sort of put in your skills and you get Handy. There's also one called Thumbtack, and then you get emails when people are looking for someone to help them with whatever project it is. If you do something like that, make sure you look and see how much other people charge. I think a lot of times as academics, we sell ourselves way short. We don't think that our labor is worth very much. The first wedding I officiated, I charged $150 for personalized wedding vows that required several hours of interviewing with each party and writing these vows, and then travel to the venue, and it's full day, and definitely didn't charge enough money. So look and see what other people are charging. But I did want to mention that one because you're probably less familiar with it. And then there are, of course, your traditional job sites like Craigslist and Monster.com, where you can list your, you can look for jobs, looking for contract labor. Increasingly, that's the only kind of work that's out there. So both fortunately and unfortunately, you can often find good leads on those sites. But then also, don't forget your career centers if you work on a campus. I think we often imagine those are only for undergraduates, but anybody can go there. And for a lot of academics, it's helpful because you don't know how to write, at least I didn't know how to write a resume or a CV for a job that wasn't an academic one. And they can often help you with that. So don't forget those spots for sort of traditional help. So I wanted to end today by talking about this issue. So is my side gig my new career, or should I finish my dissertation anyway? I think this really depends on your long and short-term goals, but I would encourage us all to remain open to possibilities. As I say here, be open to unexpected opportunities. You never know when that side gig is going to turn in, as a tutor for the test prep company is going to turn into turn into a managerial career or a chance to open your own shop, right? So be sort of open to those in the same way that, I think once we start an academic program, we're sort of sucked along that river, but we might, there might be a branch out that we want to take. So just be open to that. And remember, just keep in mind both those short and long-term goals, but again, be open to them changing. But then I think it's also important to be realistic, and this goes across all of these concerns, right? Be realistic about the limits of the academic job market, especially as interdisciplinary scholars. Be realistic about whether or not you can actually make a living at side gig work, right? Making a living, for example, as a freelance writer is incredibly difficult. Right? It can sound great to start, but when you get paid literally a penny a word, you can start to realize that's not necessarily sustainable. I wanted to toss in something here that I wasn't sure where else to talk about it, but make sure you pay your taxes on your side gig work. And this is really important. As academics, we often making very little money, so we don't pay a lot in taxes, but we pay a little bit. If we've worked at jobs where you get a W-4, W-2, you're used to the state taking care, your employer taking care of taxes. If you're working freelance, a good rule of thumb is to save a quarter of your income to pay taxes on it. And I wanted to mention that today because side gig work can often erase itself as useful come tax time if you haven't saved or paid quarterly taxes. So that's, I talk more about that in the webinar about writing for public audiences, but make sure you pay your taxes or you'll find yourself in a real pickle in April. And then finally, I wanted to end by saying, if you decide to sort of go the side gig route, it's really important to find community, other people who are freelancing or are contracting labor. So you don't, because it can feel really isolating and lonely when you don't have a workplace with fellow workers, and the conviviality that can come with that. So there are lots of ways to find that community. Your town might have a sort of a monthly mixer for writers, for example. We have one in Baltimore for journalists and writers. You might just working at the coffee shop or the co-working space can often be a place to find people. And I think this is another good reason to be open about the work that we do with our peers, because a lot of people are doing this work and we're not talking about it openly. But if we did, I think we could find really good community. So that's that is the webinar for today. And so we're all done now, but I wanted to ask if anyone had any questions or other links. Oh, I see a question about the webinar for public audiences. Let me find 1 second, because I think that would be relevant. I am also having trouble finding that as well, but let me do. Right, I'm having trouble finding it as well, but we will put the link to it in the email that we send out to y'all with this link. And let's see. There's some information about that in this webinar, but I'll also add that link to the next one. I've written a lot for, I've done a lot of freelance writing, and once you do a little bit, it's much easier to get more. I will say that, and I will also say that it's helped me in my academic writing to write so regularly for public audiences, because it has to be accessible, and you have to do it quickly. And there's nothing about academic writing, in my experience, that encourages us to be quick about it. So writing regularly for public audiences has been really powerful. But I'll make sure to include that link when we send out the email. Any other questions or concerns or experiences that make anybody want to or not want to do side work? Well, do you use university HR? I have used university HR to find side gigs. I think looking for job listings, I think I've used that to get side gigs inside the university, but I've also just approached departments and asked. Advising is one that is a side gig that I found to be really helpful. It's paid well, and does seem like something that could be a fallback career for me. Fallback, that sounds so negative. A career if I get tired of teaching someday. So often just emailing to see if there's work, but campus HR will have lots of lists. And often one thing that happens at my university is people often get jobs at the university doing some sort of administrative work, and then continue working on their PhDs. So I think that's a good place to get those jobs. Also want to encourage you to think about whether or not it's worth investing money or time and training for that side gig. So that's sort of the last thing I'll say. But it's been great to talk to you all today, and we have a number of webinars coming up. We have these monthly, so hopefully we'll see you again here at Ideas on Fire, and we'll send out all those links soon. Have a good day, everybody, and happy working. Bye.